1997, Apple was just 90 days away from bankruptcy. The company that would eventually become worth trillions of dollars was losing money, losing customers, and losing hope. Experts believed Apple would disappear forever. One famous technology executive even suggested Apple should shut down and return money to shareholders. But what happened next changed business history forever. Because within a few years, Apple didn't just survive. It became the most influential company on Earth. And the craziest part? The man who saved Apple had already been fired by Apple years before. Stay until the end, because the decision Apple made in a small conference room in 2007 would create more wealth than almost any product launch in history. The beginning. The story starts in 1976. Two young men worked inside a garage in California. One was a brilliant engineer named Steve Wozniak. The other was a college dropout with an unusual vision named Steve Jobs. Most people saw computers as machines for scientists. Steve Jobs saw something different. He believed every ordinary person would someday own one. That belief sounded ridiculous at the time. Computers were expensive, complicated, and intimidating. Yet Jobs was convinced the future belonged to personal computers. But what Steve Jobs did to sell his first computers shocked even his closest friends. The risk Jobs needed money, a lot of it. So he sold his Volkswagen van. Wozniak sold his calculator. Together they raised enough money to build their first products. Imagine betting your future on a machine nobody wanted. That was Apple. The first computers were assembled by hand. No fancy factory, no billion-dollar investors, just ambition. Then something incredible happened. Orders started arriving. People loved the product. Apple was becoming real, but their biggest breakthrough came from a machine that almost nobody believed would work. The Apple II revolution. In 1977, Apple released the Apple II. It became one of the first mass-market personal computers. Unlike competitors, it looked friendly. Colorful graphics, easy setup, simple design. For the first time, computers felt human. Sales exploded. Apple became one of the fastest-growing companies in America. Young millionaires were suddenly everywhere inside the company. Steve Jobs was only in his 20s. The world was watching. But success created a problem that would eventually destroy Jobs' position inside his own company. The ego wars. As Apple grew, Jobs became obsessed with perfection. Employees described him as inspiring and terrifying. He demanded excellence, he rejected average work, he pushed people beyond their limits. Some loved him, others feared him. Meanwhile, a giant competitor was rising. IBM entered the personal computer market. Suddenly, Apple wasn't the only star anymore. The battle for the future of computing had begun. To defeat IBM, Jobs launched a secret project that would change technology forever. The Macintosh inside Apple, a small team worked on a revolutionary machine. The Macintosh. Jobs wanted a computer so simple that anyone could use it. No complicated commands, no technical knowledge. Just point and click. In 1984, Apple unveiled the Macintosh with one of the most famous advertisements ever created. The commercial aired during the Super Bowl. Millions watched. The world was amazed. But just 1 year later, the man behind Macintosh would be kicked out of the company he founded. Fired. The Macintosh wasn't selling as expected. Tensions inside Apple exploded. Jobs clashed with executives. Board members lost confidence. Then, the unthinkable happened. Steve Jobs was forced out. At age 30, he lost control of Apple. Imagine creating a company and then being fired from it. Jobs later described it as devastating. His dream was gone. Most people would never recover from that humiliation. But Jobs' next move would accidentally save Apple years later. Starting over. Instead of quitting, Jobs started again. he founded a company called Next. Many considered it a failure. The computers were expensive, sales were limited, but behind the scenes, Next developed incredible technology that would later become essential. Meanwhile, Apple struggled without jobs. Innovation slowed. Products became confusing. The company began losing direction. And then Jobs made an investment that nobody took seriously at first. Pixar Jobs bought a small graphics company. It was called Pixar. Most people thought it was a risky gamble. Years passed with little success. Money disappeared, critics laughed, then everything changed. Pixar released Toy Story. The movie became a global sensation. Jobs suddenly owned one of the most successful animation companies in history. But while Pixar was soaring, Apple was quietly heading toward disaster. Apple near death. By the mid-1990s, Apple was collapsing. Sales were shrinking. Products were confusing. Losses were growing. Some analysts predicted bankruptcy. Employees feared the worst. The company desperately needed a miracle. Ironically, that miracle came from the man they had fired. Apple purchased Next, and Steve Jobs returned. What Jobs found inside Apple shocked him so much that he immediately started firing projects. The cleanup Jobs discovered Apple had dozens of confusing products, too many teams, too many ideas, too much waste. He cut product lines aggressively. Projects disappeared overnight. Employees panicked. But Jobs wasn't trying to make Apple bigger. He was trying to make Apple focused. His philosophy was simple. Great companies learn what not to build. Then Jobs made a partnership that looked impossible. Microsoft saves Apple. In 1997, Jobs walked onto a stage. Then he announced something shocking. Apple and Microsoft would work together? Yes, the same Microsoft that had been Apple's biggest rival. Many Apple fans were furious, some even booed. But Jobs didn't care. He cared about survival. The investment helped stabilize Apple. And then Apple released a colorful computer that changed everything. The iMac. The iMac looked nothing like traditional computers. Bright colors, curved design, simple setup. People loved it. Sales exploded. Apple was profitable again. The comeback had begun. But Jobs wasn't satisfied. He wanted more than computers. He wanted to reinvent entire industries. The first industry Apple targeted was music. The iPod. In 2001, Apple launched the iPod. 1,000 songs in your pocket. The idea sounded simple today. At the time, it was revolutionary. Consumers rushed to buy it. Soon, the iconic white earbuds were everywhere. Apple wasn't just a computer company anymore. It was becoming a lifestyle brand. But the iPod wasn't the real master plan. It was only preparing the world for something much bigger. The secret project inside Apple. Teams worked in extreme secrecy. Few employees knew the full picture. Jobs believed phones would eventually replace music players. If Apple didn't build the future, someone else would. Years of development followed. Millions of dollars were invested. Failure was possible. Then came the presentation that changed human behavior forever. The iPhone, January 2007. Steve Jobs walked onto a stage. He announced 3 products: a phone, an iPod, an internet communicator. Then he repeated it, again and again. The audience slowly realized something. They weren't 3 products. They were one. The iPhone. History changed that day. What happened after the launch shocked even Apple. World domination. The iPhone exploded. Consumers lined up for hours, then days, then weeks. Entire industries transformed. Photography, music, navigation, communication. Everything moved into a smartphone. Apple became one of the most powerful companies on earth. But behind the scenes, Jobs was fighting a battle nobody knew about. the final challenge. Steve Jobs was seriously ill. Despite health problems, he continued working. He focused on Apple's future. He built teams, developed leaders, created long-term plans. He knew Apple needed to survive without him. In 2011, Jobs passed away. The world mourned. Many believed Apple would decline. Instead, something unexpected happened. Life after Jobs. Under Tim Cook, Apple continued growing. New products arrived, services expanded, revenue climbed. Critics kept predicting Apple's fall. Yet year after year, the company became stronger. The lesson became clear. Great companies aren't built around products, they're built around systems and culture. And the final lesson from Apple may be the most valuable one of all. The big lesson. Apple's story isn't really about technology, it's about vision. When everyone saw computers as tools, Jobs saw companions. When everyone saw failure, he saw opportunity. When Apple was dying, he saw a future nobody else could imagine. From a garage to one of the most valuable companies in history, the journey wasn't luck. It was relentless focus, relentless innovation, and the courage to think differently. Because sometimes the biggest success stories begin exactly where everyone else thinks the story is over. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more business documentaries and success stories. Next week, we'll uncover how Nike built a global empire from a car trunk and a crazy dream.